Today we'll look at 4 cases about poisoners in Ukraine. In Kyiv, a woman was slowly dying from a mysterious illness. In Khmelnytskyi, robbers miscalculated the dose of a psychotropic drug and thus signed a death sentence for their victim. In Odessa, the Clonidine sisters were active, and in Chernihiv, criminals poisoned lonely pensioners and people with disabilities for several years for the sake of apartments. So today I will tell you about toxic schemes through which criminals take away property, and along with it, the lives of Ukrainian citizens. This episode is poisonous, let's put it that way, but make yourselves comfortable, dear ones, because this is scary. In just a few months, a 60-year-old woman from Kyiv went from being active and healthy to becoming seriously ill. An unknown illness has basically confined her to bed. The woman spent 2 months in the hospital. There, her symptoms, such as hair loss, swelling of the limbs, lack of appetite, and weakness, were explained by the diagnosis of toxic hepatitis. But at that time, the doctor still couldn't understand what exactly caused such a sudden illness. One day she was fine, and the next, very unwell. Unfortunately, the cause of this condition could only be determined after the patient's death. And this happened, as you understand, not by chance. This poisoning was intentional, and someone had to be held responsible for it. The heroine of this story began back in 2021. That was when she went to the doctor, who, after conducting tests, concluded that the woman had toxic hepatitis. In short, that's also what they call inflammation of the liver caused by exposure to harmful chemicals, such as medications, alcohol, environmental toxins, or products of industrial pollution. So, after hearing such a diagnosis, the woman was admitted to the hospital. Even with medical supervision, the woman from Kyiv's condition did not improve. In fact, it worsened. Throughout the entire period of illness and the time spent in the hospital, the woman was cared for by her 67-year-old partner. At that time, the couple had been together for about 20 years and still acted as if they had just met, though they never officially registered their relationship. When the woman's condition worsened to the point that she could no longer hold cutlery or feed herself, the man began to take even more care of the woman and brought homemade food to the hospital with which he fed his partner. I think you've already started to understand a little bit. Yes, a little more than a month after being in the hospital, the patient was finally sent home. More precisely, the woman's partner insisted on this. By that time, his partner's condition had become so bad that she could no longer walk and was basically bedridden. So the man blamed the doctors for this and took the woman home. He said, "You know what? We'd better handle this ourselves." Another 2 months passed like this, and her partner continued to take care of the woman from Kyiv on his own. In August 2021, she suddenly passed away. It was only after the woman's death that her relatives began to notice the strange behavior of her beloved. Do you see? He insisted that his partner died as a result of a long illness. Therefore, there was no need to perform an autopsy on her body. Moreover, he forbade it. In addition, despite the fact that the deceased's heir was her sister, the man claimed rights to his partner's property, including the apartment and the car. In his statement, the man claimed that he took care of the woman, which was indeed true, but the question is how he did it, one way or another. He added that he has every right to receive the inheritance. Although the woman's apartment eventually went to her sister, the cohabitants still managed to appropriate the deceased woman's savings. That's a lot, $20,000. When did the full-scale invasion of Ukraine start? The man also took the deceased woman's car for himself and told her relatives a fabricated story that the car had burned in Irpin during the occupation. Ultimately, all of this gave the deceased woman's relatives reason to believe that the beloved man who cared so much for her in the last days of her life could very well have been involved in her mysterious illness and also her death. Later, law enforcement officers who took up the case also had similar grounds. The reason for this was that the woman's relatives from Kyiv insisted on her autopsy, while her former partner did not want to do it. One way or another, an examination was carried out, and it showed that the woman's death was caused by inflammation and necrosis of internal organs due to heavy metal poisoning. During the investigation, which lasted several years by the way, the police found out that for a long time the woman from Kyiv had been consuming a chemical substance that contains compounds of the infamous thallium. If you haven't watched the video on my channel about thallium poisoning, then check it out. The investigators concluded that the poison was mixed into the victim's food and drinks, which was very convenient for the killer. Moreover, it was established that the woman from Kyiv continued to consume the deadly food even while she was in the hospital. And how can we not recall what she ate while she was in the hospital? Considering this, suspicion once again fell on the woman's partner, since he was the one who took care of her during her illness, literally fed her with a spoon, and brought food to the medical facility. By that time, the man himself had already moved to Volyn, where in May 2022 he bought himself an apartment with the money he took from his partner after her death. In July 2024, the police searched that apartment and found the deceased's bank card, as well as a container with a loose substance, which was sent for examination. That same day, the man was notified of the suspicion and placed in preventive detention. According to law enforcement, the motive for this murder was the man's desire to take possession of his partner's property, which is very logical.
With selfish motives in mind. For the last few months of his partner's life, the perpetrator was adding a highly toxic heavy metal to her food and drinks, which made her feel worse every day, and eventually she ended up in the hospital. After her death, the perpetrator tried to take possession of her apartment, and when he failed, he took the deceased's car and about $20,000 and moved to the Volyn region.
January 20, 2025. Recently, the press service of the Kyiv City Prosecutor's Office reported that the pretrial investigation in this case has already been completed and the indictment has been sent to the Volyn District Court of the city of Kyiv. If the man is found guilty, he faces from 10 to 15 years in prison or even a life sentence, although at his age, 10 to 15 years could basically be a life sentence. The prosecutor's office also recalled the protest. According to Article 62 of the Constitution of Ukraine, a person is considered innocent of committing a crime and cannot be subjected to criminal punishment until their guilt is proven in accordance with the law and established by a court's guilty verdict. Whoa, these feelings, the hormones of love, can be dangerous. And how did you spend Valentine's Day? It's that time when social media is full of romantic posts and stores are packed with teddy bears and heart-shaped candies. But let's be honest, life isn't some rainbow where everyone is in love and happy, and for many people this day doesn't bring warmth to their hearts at all. That's life. Some search for true love, while others recover from past or toxic relationships. And some people simply can't celebrate at all because their loved one is no longer with them. Not feeling like you're part of this holiday, or sometimes even this world, is okay. It's just important to know that you're not alone in what you're going through. And it would be really great if you could talk to someone who will truly listen to you, not just nod while waiting for Shtemi to finally change. These could be friends, family, or acquaintances, but if you lack that opportunity or close relationship, you can't always be fully open with family, and sometimes it's even harder to share certain things with those closest to you. A gang of robbers was traveling around Ukraine, robbing people and poisoning them during their, let's say, work. In Khmelnytskyi, the criminals miscalculated the dose of poison, which led to one of the victims ending up in intensive care, and another person even died. But what was really happening and why? So, on August 20, 2017, around 6 in the morning, passers-by in a Khmelnytskyi courtyard saw two women lying on the ground, unconscious. Thinking that they had fallen ill, concerned people called an ambulance. When the medics arrived and examined the women, they realized that one of them showed no signs of life. They were unable to resuscitate this 29-year-old woman from Khmelnytskyi, and later the paramedics pronounced her dead. The deceased woman's friend, a 32-year-old woman who was lying next to her, was in extremely serious condition but was still breathing. She was immediately taken to the intensive care unit. Meanwhile, the body of the deceased was sent for examination, and later the results showed that the woman died as a result of poisoning with an antipsychotic drug. Usually, such drugs are used for various symptoms of psychosis and schizophrenia, as well as for bipolar affective disorder, acute manic psychotic disorders, dementia, and for long-term treatment of psychotic disorders in general. But here's the thing, neither the deceased nor her friend suffered from any mental illnesses or disorders. So, when law enforcement realized that the women had been poisoned, they started investigating the case. Soon, the police established that on the eve of the poisoning, the two victims had been relaxing at one of the city's entertainment venues. There, they met a group consisting of a 23-year-old woman and her two older brothers. After a brief conversation, this group suggested that the two friends continue getting to know each other in a slightly different atmosphere and invited them for coffee. The five of them went to the bus station where they ordered drinks. It was in these drinks that the sister and her brothers secretly added a substance which would later become the cause of the women's poisoning. When the friends drank the coffee, they started to feel unwell and soon they lost consciousness. Meanwhile, the group took the victims' mobile phones and jewelry, totaling about 18,500 hryvnias. When the robbery was over, both unconscious women were taken to Myru Avenue, where they were simply left in one of the courtyards. After that, the gang of robbers left the city. It took investigators and detectives almost half a year to track down the suspects. During this time, officers visited multiple regions and collected evidence linking 3 criminals to the two friends' case and other similar incidents across Ukraine. Officers from other departments also had to join the investigation. During this time, it was established that the organizer of the crimes was a 23-year-old woman, a native of one of the villages in Mykolaiv region. When she came up with the idea to make money illegally, she shared it with her 30-year-old friend who was born in Luhansk region. This man had previously been repeatedly prosecuted specifically for robbery and fraud. The idea of his friend, which, as you have already figured out, was to poison and rob people, seriously interested the man. Without wasting any time, the accomplices began to act, and soon after, they poisoned 3 girls from Donetsk region by putting a dangerous substance in their food. When it took effect, the girls lost consciousness, and the criminals took both money and jewelry. And of course, they fled the scene of the crime. By the way, the victims spent several days in intensive care, but fortunately, both survived. So, after the first robberies, the woman who organized the criminal scheme decided to involve another acquaintance. It turned out to be a 31-year-old resident of Zaporizhia who had not previously been connected to the criminal world in any way. Despite this, he agreed to become an accomplice in future crimes because of his difficult financial situation. When the gang of 3 criminals was finally formed, they refined their initial scheme a little. Now the robbers started renting cars from car rentals and driving around cities in Ukraine looking for victims. The criminals preferred women. Usually they met them at resorts or entertainment venues. The 23-year-old leader of the group always introduced herself as the sister of her accomplices. Mostly, she watched the actions of the men who met women and girls, gained their trust, and put poison in their food or drinks. After the victims lost consciousness, the criminals robbed and abandoned them. Of course, while still unconscious, they would move on to another city or region with a new job. In short, the criminals followed this scheme from October to August 2017. They arrived in Khmelnytskyi in mid-August. This time, for some reason, the criminals decided to increase the dose of the drug, as a result of which one of their victims died. When law enforcement officers began to actively investigate this case, they were able to track down the criminal group. This became possible thanks to the car that the criminals had rented.
The police found out which car the criminals were using. As it turned out, the Daewoo Lanos was rented by one of the suspects, a 29-year-old native of Luhansk region. Later, they managed to identify his accomplices, a 30-year-old native of Zaporizhia region and a 23-year-old woman from Mykolaiv region. It's hard to say where they permanently lived, because this criminal trio traveled almost all over the country. All 3 are currently detained in pre-trial detention centers. As it turned out, they are involved in a whole series of property crimes in different regions.
Overall, law enforcement officers established that at least 8 Ukrainian residents became victims of the group, but the police believe there could have been many more victims. At the time of their arrest, investigators charged all 3 suspects with several criminal offenses, including involuntary manslaughter, attempted murder, armed robbery, and theft. Under these articles, they faced a lengthy prison sentence or even life imprisonment, but the gang members heard their verdict only 5 years after their arrest. March 1, 2023. The press service of the Khmelnytskyi Regional Prosecutor's Office reported that the woman who organized the criminal group and her accomplice, who had a criminal record, were sentenced to 14 years in prison. Meanwhile, the third criminal will serve 10 years and 6 months in prison. In addition, it is known that all 3 convicts had all their property confiscated. Case number 3 is actually very similar to the previous story that once happened in Odessa. The only difference is that this time the perpetrators were 2 sisters whom the press dubbed Clonidine. In June 2019, 2 drivers from Vinnytsia were relaxing at a bar on an Odessa beach. There they met 2 sisters, and at first the story seemed romantic. The men liked the women, and the women, in turn, responded to their attention. After meeting, all 4 of them sat at the same table and ordered alcoholic drinks at the bar. A few hours passed, and it was already getting dark outside. Then the group decided to move their date to the beach, where they continued drinking alcohol. When the women's companions got distracted, it was easy since they were under the influence. One of the girls added a substance to the men's drinks, which acts very similarly to Clonidine, and that's why the media would later call the girls the Clonidine sisters. So after the men drank what was in their glasses, they started to feel unwell and soon lost consciousness. Then the women took their mobile phones and money and disappeared. By the way, the amount of money the victims had with them was only a few hundred hryvnias, really, not much at all. After taking the loot, the perpetrators left the crime scene. After some time, one of the victims woke up. According to him, at that moment, he had a severe headache and nausea, and he could remember the events that happened to him the day before, but only partially. When he came to his senses a bit, he saw his friend nearby, who showed no signs of life. As I said, the story is painfully similar to the previous one. After what he saw, his memory slowly began to return, and the frightened man called the police as well as the medics. The doctors were unable to resuscitate the unconscious victim, and his body was sent for examination, the results of which showed that the man's death was caused by poisoning with a medical drug. Meanwhile, the other man who survived the encounter with the sisters was sent to the hospital. Despite some memory loss, he eventually described to law enforcement the girls he and his friends spent time with the previous day. The police detained the girls quite quickly. At that time, the perpetrators hadn't even managed to sell the deceased's phone yet, and that phone became one of the key pieces of evidence of their guilt. At the same time, the ladies themselves denied their guilt. According to their initial statements, they met and spent time with the victims that evening but denied putting anything in the men's drinks or knowing about it, saying the men just fell asleep on their own. Well, as for them, the girls took advantage of the moment and did steal their personal belongings, but according to the girls, no one was planning to poison anyone. Despite these statements, law enforcement proved the women's guilt and found evidence linking them to similar incidents.
The women, born in 1991 and 1996, residents of Bilhorod-Dnistrovsky district, were searched, resulting in the seizure of a large quantity of medical drugs as well as physical evidence from other episodes of criminal activity.
After that, the perpetrators finally agreed to admit their guilt, although their version differed somewhat from the one given by the victim.
We went to a cafe, got some alcoholic drinks, started drinking, and then I put sleeping pills in their drinks, guys.
Then they started to fall asleep, and after all that, when they were asleep, we took one of their phones.
The trial in this case took place in May 2023. The women were found guilty of robbery committed by an organized group, combined with causing serious bodily harm as well as manslaughter through negligence. Both defendants were sentenced to 8 years in prison. By the trial, they had already served half their sentence in pre-trial detention, so they'll be released soon. Said the Ukrainian police. January 15, 2025. Law enforcement officers of Chernihiv region, together with the special unit KORD, broke into a building where two men were trying to force a 66-year-old Chernihiv resident to drink alcohol containing potent medicinal drugs and methyl alcohol. The victim was visually impaired and, let's say, fit perfectly into the criminal scheme that the perpetrators had been practicing for years. After this special operation, the police released information stating that two residents of Chernihiv regularly poisoned lonely pensioners and people with disabilities, with the aim of taking possession of their property. The men started their crimes well before their arrest, with dozens already falling victim during that period. This is shown by the large number of passports, cash, bank cards, pension certificates, and mobile phones belonging to the victims that law enforcement officers found during the search of the criminal's apartment. In addition, law enforcement officers seized from the offender's powers of attorney purchase and sale statements, authorizations, potent pills, a rifle, a smoothbore shotgun with cartridges, and bottles of alcohol. The examination revealed that this alcohol's methanol concentration was nearly 140 times above the permissible limit. Truly extraordinary. During the investigation, officers found that two suspects, aged 44 and 30, targeted vulnerable individuals as victims. As I mentioned, this includes pensioners, people with disabilities, and those in difficult life situations. The criminals would get acquainted with such people and gain their trust. After approaching their future victim, the men would slowly get them drunk. For this, they would regularly bring their own alcohol to the meetings, to which they initially added toxic substances in small doses, so that the victims would lose their vigilance and could be controlled. Well, after that, the men convinced the victims to sign a power of attorney and give them the right to manage their real estate, supposedly only for the necessary documents. Once in the hands of the criminals, they would arrange another meeting with the victim, and of course they would bring alcohol again. However, this time the drink contained a lethal dose of poison. Well, after learning about the activities of these men, let's say, the police developed a special operation during which they detained the criminals. At that moment, they tried to give a deadly drink to another victim, a 66-year-old man from Chernihiv, who fortunately survived. After the arrest and search of the criminal's house, they were charged with attempted murder by a group acting out of selfish motives. And in fact, they began to investigate the case of large-scale fraud. The exact number of victims of this deadly scam remains unknown, judging by the photos of documents and passports of the victims published by the police. There are, let's say, quite a lot of them. This is actually a very recent case, and currently a pre-trial investigation is still ongoing, within which law enforcement officers have to identify all the individuals who suffered from the actions of the perpetrators. It is currently known that the suspects face imprisonment for a term of 10 to 15 years or even life imprisonment with confiscation of property. Well, dear friends, that's the video for today. As always, I want to say first of all, thank you for watching it all the way to the very end, and secondly, stay healthy and be careful about who you let into your life. And of course, who you leave. Seriously, you really don't need to make it a revolving door, so to speak. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next video. And if you want to watch more right now, there are 14 videos available for sponsors.